We live in a time where things are so easy in so many ways.
Right.
We have access to basically anything we want.
Yeah,
We can get information on anything we want.
pretty much.
But still, so many of us, we just have this feeling that something's missing.
Yeah.
Like it's not quite right.
That's true.
It's like we have all this stuff and it just doesn't translate into like a deep sense of satisfaction.
Right. It's really strange when you think about it.
Yeah.
Even a few hundred years ago, the things that we just take for granted. Things like being able to just turn on a tap and have clean water.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Or, being able to communicate with someone instantly.
Yeah.
Or having endless entertainment at our fingertips. These were luxuries for, even the wealthiest people.
Totally.
And now they're just sort of part of our everyday life, but we're not necessarily happier.
And maybe that's because we're thinking about happiness the wrong way. Welcome to Between the Lines. We are going to explore a really insightful book today.
Sounds good.
It's called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, and it's written by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I think this one is really going to resonate with our listeners, the folks who are genuinely interested in understanding themselves better and want to learn things they can actually apply to their lives without feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, makes sense. It's a classic for a reason.
Right. This isn't about just skimming the surface. We're going to really dig into the core ideas, explore how we experience happiness and find fulfillment. We're talking about getting to the heart of what makes life feel truly worthwhile.
That's a great goal.
And to do that, we'll draw directly from Csikszentmihalyi's research and observations, not just some abstract theories.
I like it.
So to get us started, I think it's interesting how the book begins, really questioning why so many people still feel dissatisfied, anxious, even bored. I mean, think about it. We've made huge advancements, longer lifespans, more comfortable lives, but satisfaction seems to elude many of us.
Yeah, absolutely. The book actually starts by posing this really basic question, doesn't it? It's like, why is it that even though we're objectively better off in so many ways, there's this underlying sense that something's missing?
Right. It highlights this contradiction.
Yeah.
You can have all these material comforts, yet still struggle with a feeling of emptiness.
Exactly. And it challenges this assumption that just having more stuff, more options will automatically make us happy. It points out very directly that it just doesn't work that way.
And it brings us to this interesting idea about happiness itself. This idea that, the more you chase it directly, the harder it is to find.
Kind of like a paradox, isn't it?
It is. Csikszentmihalyi suggests that true happiness, kind of like real success, is often a side effect.
Interesting.
It's what happens when you're completely absorbed in what you're doing, when you're so focused on a task that you lose yourself in it. That's when happiness seems to find you.
And that ties in really well with the idea of finding a purpose, something larger than yourself to dedicate your energy to.
Absolutely. It's not about seeking happiness for its own sake, but finding it in the pursuit of something meaningful.
Exactly. And that's where the author's critique of quick fixes comes in. The idea that there's some easy solution out there, some shortcut to lasting happiness. He really pushes back against those temporary goals, the chase for wealth or popularity. He's saying, look, that might feel good for a little while, but it won't give you genuine contentment.
It makes me think of those ads you see for the latest gadget or the quick weight loss scheme.
Yeah, exactly. Promises of instant gratification, instant happiness.
They are very tempting.
They are. But Csikszentmihalyi argues that what truly satisfies us is a much deeper sense of well-being. It's about feeling good about your life as a whole, not just achieving isolated goals.
More holistic.
Exactly. It's not about patching over the cracks, but addressing the underlying foundation.
So, in a way, the book offers a kind of roadmap for how to do that.
That's a good way to put it. A roadmap. It's not a set of strict instructions, more like a framework to help you understand your own experiences and find what works for you.
So it promises to show us how to get a grip on our own consciousness.
Yeah, how to bring some order to that internal world, to our thoughts and feelings. It's about learning to make our inner experience more enjoyable and ultimately more meaningful.
That's a pretty ambitious goal.
Oh, absolutely. But the author acknowledges that putting this into practice is where the real work begins.
Right. So even though the concepts themselves may seem simple,
It's the consistent effort, the dedication that can be challenging.
he actually compares it to losing weight, right? You might know what you should be doing, but actually doing it is a whole other story.
Yeah, it's a great analogy, I think. We all have those areas in our lives where we know what we should be doing, but the actual doing part is well, it's tough.
But he also makes a point of saying that the stakes here are much higher than just our physical well-being.
Absolutely. It's about living a life that's actually worth living, a life that feels meaningful and fulfilling to you.
And that brings up his point about the universe itself and how it's not necessarily conspiring against us, but it's also not going out of its way to cater to our desires.
Right. It's indifferent.
Exactly. Natural events just happen regardless of our needs or desires. It's humbling thought.
It is. And it emphasizes the need for us to take responsibility for our own well-being, to become active participants in shaping our experience rather than just expecting the universe to hand us happiness on a silver platter.
So it's not enough to just hope for a better life. We have to.
We have to actively work towards it. And a big part of that work is internal. It's about shifting our perspectives, our habits of mind, and our way of interacting with the world.
He's really cautioning against what he calls cultural hubris.
Oh, right. That tendency to think that progress will just magically solve all our problems and make life easy.
Yeah. He argues that this kind of thinking can actually make us less resilient in the face of adversity.
Because when things inevitably get tough, as they always do, we're not prepared to deal with it.
It's like expecting a smooth ride all the time and then being completely thrown off when you hit a bump in the road.
Exactly. He's advocating for a more realistic view of life, one that acknowledges both the joys and the inevitable challenges.
And that brings us back to his point about those surface-level solutions, those quick fixes that promise instant happiness.
Right, those things that might make us feel good in the moment, but ultimately don't address the underlying issues.
The things we often turn to when we're feeling dissatisfied.
Exactly. And he's not saying those things are inherently bad, but that they're often a distraction from the real work we need to do to cultivate lasting well-being.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches.
It's a great analogy. You're addressing the symptoms, but not the root cause.
And it's interesting how he connects this to the historical role of religion.
Oh, right. Historically, religion has often provided people with a sense of purpose and meaning, a set of values and beliefs to guide their lives.
And in a world that increasingly prioritizes scientific reasoning, those traditional frameworks might not resonate as strongly for some people.
Right. It's not that those beliefs are necessarily wrong, but they might not provide the same level of certainty for everyone in our modern world.
So what does he offer as an alternative?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of taking control of your own inner life.
Okay, let's unpack that.
He argues that by simply following our instincts or blindly adhering to social expectations, we're essentially relinquishing control of our own psychic energy.
And by psychic energy, he means?
Think of it as your attention, your capacity to focus and direct your mental resources. He uses this term to highlight how precious and finite our attention is, how easily it can be scattered and wasted.
And it gets even more interesting when you think about the limitations of our nervous systems.
Right. We can only process a certain amount of information at a time. And when we're not actively engaged, our minds tend to get filled with less stimulating input, like passively consuming entertainment that doesn't really require much mental effort.
It's like defaulting to the easiest option rather than choosing what we actually want to be focusing on.
Exactly. And that's where the importance of consciously directing our attention comes in.
So how does this idea of psychic energy fit into that?
He's basically saying that our attention is a valuable resource that we can either use effectively or squander. It's about becoming aware of where we're directing our mental energy and making conscious choices about how we want to spend it.
So instead of just letting our minds wander aimlessly,
we can choose to focus on things that are truly meaningful and engaging to us.
He describes people who are really in control of their consciousness as having this incredible ability to focus their attention at will.
Right. They can block out distractions, concentrate for as long as they need to, and often they're the ones who find joy even in the most ordinary aspects of life.
And that leads us to the idea of the self. This isn't a static, fixed thing.
No, he sees it as something more dynamic, a mental representation of our goals and values that's constantly evolving.
And this self plays a huge role in how we direct our attention, how we interpret events, and ultimately how we experience life.
Exactly. It acts as a kind of filter through which we process everything that happens to us.
And he argues that even positive external events only truly improve our quality of life when they're connected in a positive way to this sense of self.
Right. It's not just about what happens to us, but how we make meaning of it. Our self determines how we interpret and integrate those experiences into our overall sense of well-being.
And it's fascinating how he explains this through the lens of experiences themselves, both positive and negative.
Right. Like, He talks about how initially, any experience is just neutral information entering our consciousness. It doesn't inherently have a positive or negative value.
So something like getting a flat tire or facing a setback.
It's not the event itself that dictates whether we feel good or bad, but how our self, with its unique goals and values, interprets that event.
So a stronger sense of self, often developed through past successes and supportive relationships,
Can actually act as a buffer against those negative interpretations. It helps us to see those challenges as opportunities for growth rather than threats to our well-being.
That's powerful.
It is. It highlights the importance of cultivating a resilient sense of self, one that can weather the inevitable storms of life,
So it's not about avoiding challenges altogether.
but about developing the inner resources to navigate them in a way that's ultimately beneficial to us.
And it's interesting how he applies this even to the realm of work.
Yeah. Even tasks that seem mundane or boring can become more enjoyable.
Right, if we approach them with a focus on challenge and improvement.
It's like finding ways to make even the most ordinary tasks a bit more like a game.
Like an athlete trying to beat their personal best, even if it's just in how efficiently they can complete a chore.
Exactly. He calls this an internal battle, but it's not a battle against yourself. It's more about overcoming that natural tendency for your mind to become disorganized.
It's about taking control of your attention and directing it in a way that's both productive and engaging.
It's about creating those mini victories throughout your day, those moments where you feel like you're really mastering something.
And he suggests that after experiencing this kind of flow, yourself actually becomes more complex.
It's a really cool idea. He says it happens through two processes: differentiation and integration.
Okay, break those down for me.
Sure. Differentiation is about becoming more uniquely yourself, more distinct from others.
I see, so it's about individuality.
Exactly. But then there's integration, which is about connecting more deeply with others and with ideas, with something larger than yourself.
So it's this simultaneous movement towards both individuality and a sense of belonging.
Exactly. It's a really fascinating paradox. Flow helps you become more you, while also connecting you more deeply to the world around you.
And it's when we act freely for the pure enjoyment of the activity itself that we truly learn and grow.
It's like that saying, do what you love, and you'll never work a day in your life.
Right. But he also makes it clear that enjoyment doesn't come from just passively experiencing things. It requires effort, focus, and a willingness to challenge ourselves.
Right. Think about it. You can feel pleasure without expending much mental energy. But true enjoyment, the kind that leaves you feeling fulfilled and energized, demands focused attention on the activity.
And he's not just talking about physical activities. He broadens the definition of activity to include anything that requires concentration.
Yeah, he's talking about mental activities too, like reading, problem solving, even just having a really engaging conversation.
Right. It's about anything that has a goal and requires you to utilize your skills.
And when it comes to skills, he emphasizes that it's not just about physical prowess. It's about the ability to manipulate information, to work with symbols, to think critically and creatively.
So even something as simple as organizing your desk could be considered an activity if you approach it with a sense of purpose and focus.
Exactly. And he talks about how we can transform even the most ordinary moments into these microflow activities.
Microflow.
Right. These are small, manageable tasks that we can use to bring a sense of order and engagement to our day.
I like that. It's like finding little pockets of flow throughout your day.
Exactly. And while these microflow activities are valuable, he also emphasizes that the most profound enjoyment comes from engaging in more complex activities, things that really challenge our skills and push us to grow.
Which brings us to the central concept of the book, flow.
Right, that optimal experience of complete absorption in an activity. When you're in flow, time seems to melt away, your focus becomes effortless, and you lose yourself in the moment.
It's almost like being in a trance, but in a really positive way.
And he emphasizes that clear feedback is crucial for maintaining that flow state.
Why is that?
Well, feedback gives you a sense of progress. It lets you know you're on the right track. It reinforces the value of your efforts.
And it helps you stay motivated.
Exactly. And that feeling of progress and accomplishment is what ultimately strengthens our sense of self. It's like, hey, I'm doing this thing and I'm good at it.
I'm really struck by his point that enjoyment comes from exercising control in challenging situations, not just from being in control.
It's an interesting distinction. He's saying that it's not enough to just be comfortable and in charge. The real joy comes from pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zones, from testing our limits.
Like tackling a difficult project at work or learning a new skill.
Yeah, and even in situations where the outcome is largely determined by chance. He argues that the enjoyment often comes from a subjective sense of agency, this belief that we can somehow influence the outcome, even if that influence is mostly an illusion. It's about that feeling of being in the game, actively engaged, rather than passively observing.
But he also cautions us against becoming too attached to the ordered world of flow activities as a way of escaping from the messiness of real life.
Right, it's about finding a balance. Flow can be incredibly rewarding, but it shouldn't become a crutch that prevents us from engaging with the full complexity of our lives, with all its challenges and uncertainties.
So it's not about retreating into these perfect little bubbles of flow, but about learning to apply those flow principles to the world around us.
Exactly. It's about bringing that same level of focus and engagement to our relationships, our work, and even to the challenges we face.
Now, he also makes an interesting point about the loss of self-consciousness during flow.
Right. That feeling of completely losing yourself in the moment. It's a common characteristic of flow experiences.
But he argues that this doesn't mean we lose our sense of self entirely.
It's more like a temporary forgetting of our self-concept, a suspension of that inner critic that's constantly evaluating and judging.
And that temporary forgetting can be incredibly liberating.
It can. It allows us to fully immerse ourselves in the experience without the usual mental chatter and self-doubt.
And he even suggests that this can lead to what he calls self-transcendence.
Right. That feeling of expanded boundaries, a sense of connection to something larger than ourselves. It's a feeling of unity and oneness that can be deeply profound and transformative.
And it's interesting how he suggests that even negative experiences early in life can sometimes inadvertently lead us to develop unexpected skills and insights.
It's this idea that sometimes, even the most difficult experiences can contain the seeds of growth and transformation.
It's not about romanticizing suffering,
but recognizing that sometimes those challenges force us to develop skills and strengths that we wouldn't have otherwise.
And he also points out that flow experiences can occur in a wide variety of contexts, even in situations we wouldn't typically associate with enjoyment.
Like even in dangerous or challenging situations.
Right. He uses examples like war or criminal activity to illustrate this point.
Not to condone those activities, of course, but to highlight the fact that the human need for focused engagement is so fundamental that we'll seek it out even in the most unlikely places.
So it's not so much about the specific activity itself,
but about finding those opportunities for challenge and growth within whatever context we find ourselves in.
And it's about learning to distinguish between the types of flow that are ultimately beneficial and those that can lead us down a destructive path.
Absolutely. It's about being mindful of where we're directing our energy and making choices that are aligned with our values and goals.
He then dives into this exploration of games and how they offer these structured ways for us to push beyond our everyday experiences.
Games are great examples, aren't they? They provide a framework for challenge, skill development, and feedback, all within a safe and controlled environment.
But he's not just talking about video games or board games. He's talking about games in the broadest sense. Anything that involves rules, goals, and a sense of competition or challenge.
Right, and he points out that competition can actually enhance enjoyment when the focus remains on the activity itself rather than on external rewards or validation.
So it's not about winning at all costs.
No, it's about striving for excellence, pushing yourself to improve, and enjoying the process of getting better.
To illustrate this idea, he actually uses a visual diagram in the book. It's really helpful.
That diagram showing how we move between states of anxiety, boredom, and flow, depending on the balance between challenges and skills. It's really intuitive, isn't it?
It is. So if we're feeling bored, it's a sign that we need to seek out more challenging activities.
Right, and if we're feeling anxious, it means we need to work on developing our skills in that particular area.
And ultimately, the goal is to move through these cycles of flow at increasingly higher levels of both challenge and skill.
It's like a spiral staircase, isn't it? Each cycle takes you to a higher level of complexity and enjoyment.
I like that analogy. It really captures the idea of continual growth and expansion.
And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, he suggests that different cultures can actually shape lifestyles to make flow more or less likely.
How so?
Well, some cultures might naturally provide more opportunities for challenge and action, while others might emphasize comfort and security.
So it's not just about individual effort, but also about the environment we find ourselves in.
Right. Our culture, our upbringing, our social circles, these all play a role in shaping our opportunities to experience flow.
And he highlights this really interesting paradox in modern society. We have more leisure time than ever before,
but often lack the skills to actually turn that free time into true enjoyment.
It's like we have all these ingredients for a delicious meal, but we don't know how to cook.
It's a great analogy. It's not enough to just have free time.
Yeah.
We need to know how to use that time in a way that's meaningful and fulfilling.
Okay, so I'm curious, does everyone have the same capacity for flow? Does everyone experience it in the same way?
Well, he acknowledges that some people might have neurological conditions that make it more difficult to achieve those flow states.
That makes sense.
But even beyond that, he argues that some of us might be limited by things like attentional disorders or excessive self-consciousness.
So internal factors can also create barriers to flow.
Right. It's not just about external circumstances. Our internal makeup, our personality traits, our habits of mind, these all play a role.
And he suggests that a balanced ability to focus and a less rigid sense of self are more conducive to flow.
Yes. It's about finding that sweet spot between being able to concentrate deeply on a task and also being flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances.
And he highlights the importance of early childhood experiences in shaping our capacity for flow.
Oh, absolutely. The way we're parented, the kind of environment we grow up in, those early experiences could have a huge impact on how we relate to the world and how easily we can access those flow states.
What kind of parenting styles does he suggest are most beneficial?
Well, he talks about the importance of clarity, of parents being clear and consistent in their expectations. He also emphasizes the value of centering on the child's present experience, of really being present with them in the moment.
So not just focusing on achievements or future goals,
but really paying attention to what the child is experiencing in the here and now. He also talks about the importance of providing choices, fostering a sense of commitment, and instilling confidence.
It sounds like he's advocating for a parenting style that's both supportive and empowering.
Exactly. And he argues that this kind of parenting can help to develop what he calls an autotelic personality. It means self-motivated, intrinsically driven. An autotelic person finds enjoyment in the process of doing, regardless of external rewards or recognition.
Oh, I see. So it's about finding joy in the journey itself, not just the destination.
Right. And he contrasts this with people who are more focused on seeking pleasure or avoiding pain.
So it's not just about feeling good,
but about actively engaging with life, embracing challenges, and finding satisfaction in the pursuit of something meaningful.
He then paints this really vivid picture of people with these autotelic personalities.
Right. He describes them as having this remarkable ability to turn even the most challenging situations into opportunities for growth and enjoyment.
It's almost like they have this internal alchemy that allows them to transform adversity into something valuable.
It is. And he gives some really powerful examples, like people in prison finding intellectual stimulation, or individuals with severe physical limitations finding new ways to interact with the world.
It's inspiring to think that even in the most difficult circumstances, we have the capacity to find meaning and joy.
Absolutely. It all comes back to that internal locus of control, that ability to take responsibility for our own experience and find ways to make it meaningful, regardless of external circumstances.
And that leads us to his point about the inherent value of our bodies.
Oh, right. He reminds us that our bodies are so much more than just physical objects. Their real value lies in the experiences they allow us to have.
And that's where the concept of flow can be applied to everyday activities like walking, eating, even just being in nature.
Exactly. He talks about how we can find flow in these simple activities by setting intentional goals and developing our skills to engage with our environment in new ways.
So, like paying close attention to the sensations of walking, noticing the details of your surroundings, or savoring the flavors of your food.
Right. It's about bringing that same level of mindful attention to those everyday experiences that we often take for granted.
And it's interesting how he suggests that intimacy can also be cultivated towards greater complexity and enjoyment.
He's talking about how we can apply the principles of flow to our relationships, particularly in the realm of intimacy.
And that means?
It's about being fully present with your partner, giving them your undivided attention, and really experiencing the moment together. It's about shared exploration, mutual growth, and a willingness to be vulnerable and open with each other.
So it's not just about physical pleasure.
It's about connecting on a deeper level, both emotionally and intellectually. It's about creating shared experiences that are both meaningful and enjoyable.
He then explores Eastern practices like Hatha Yoga as advanced methods for achieving control over our consciousness and our bodies.
Yeah, he sees these practices as a model for how we can increase our psychic energy and develop a greater capacity for flow.
So it's not just about relaxation or stress relief.
It's about developing a deeper awareness of our internal states and learning to regulate our attention and energy.
And he also talks about how we can cultivate flow through our senses.
Right. He talks about focusing our attention on things like visual art, music, or even just the simple act of tasting food.
It's about consciously engaging with our sensory experiences and finding those moments of flow in the beauty and complexity of the world around us.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that developing skills in these areas can unlock a whole new world of flow experiences.
But he also cautions against excessive external pressure, like, for example, parents pushing their kids too hard to achieve perfect musical performance.
Right. He's saying that when we're too focused on external validation or achieving specific outcomes, we can actually lose sight of the intrinsic enjoyment of the activity itself.
And that can actually stifle the flow experience.
It can. It's like when the pressure's too high, it can create anxiety and self-doubt, which can block our ability to fully immerse ourselves in the moment and enjoy the process.
So it's a delicate balance, isn't it?
It is. It's about finding that sweet spot between challenge and skill, where we're pushing ourselves without overwhelming ourselves.
Now, when it comes to mental activities, he emphasizes that the same conditions for flow apply.
Right. We need to have skills in a particular area, a set of rules to follow, a clear goal to work towards, and feedback to let us know how we're doing.
So whether we're writing a novel, solving a math problem, or just having a really stimulating conversation,
The same principles of flow are at play.
But he also acknowledges that the natural state of our minds is often chaotic and easily distracted.
It's like our attention is constantly being pulled in a million different directions.
So how do we create the conditions for mental flow in a world that's so full of distractions?
He suggests that it takes practice, discipline, and an intentional effort to cultivate those conditions.
And a willingness to resist the urge to turn to passive entertainment or distractions when things get tough.
He's not saying those things are inherently bad, but that they can become problematic when they're used as a way to avoid dealing with our internal world.
It's like using those distractions as a way to numb ourselves.
Exactly. He's advocating for a more mindful approach, one that encourages us to engage with our thoughts and emotions, even the uncomfortable ones, rather than just trying to escape them.
And he highlights the crucial role that memory plays in mental flow.
Right. Memory provides us with a framework for organizing information and making connections.
And a sense of continuity.
Exactly. It connects us to our past and helps us to make sense of the present.
He points out that having a good memory was highly valued in the past. But with the advent of written records and the internet,
That value has diminished somewhat.
but he argues that the act of remembering itself, especially when it's intrinsically motivated, can be a source of enjoyment and order in our lives.
Like flexing those mental muscles, keeping our minds sharp and engaged.
And it's not just about passively recalling facts. It's about actively engaging with our memories, making connections, and finding meaning in our personal histories.
Exactly. And that active engagement is what helps to create those flow experiences.
Beyond memory, he emphasizes the importance of our ability to recognize patterns and create ordering systems.
Right. Those mental frameworks that help us to make sense of the world, like language, numbers, scientific theories.
He suggests that these ordering systems are essential for mental flow.
They provide us with a structure for organizing information, for making connections, and for generating new ideas.
And he argues that the development of things like philosophy and science was driven not just by practical concerns, but by the inherent pleasure of thinking and creating order.
It's like there's this deep-seated human desire to understand, to make sense of the world around us.
And that drive for understanding can be incredibly rewarding in and of itself.
He talks about how great thinkers throughout history have often been motivated by this intrinsic joy of discovery, not just by external rewards or recognition.
It's a reminder that learning and intellectual exploration can be deeply fulfilling experiences, even if they don't lead to any tangible outcomes.
Absolutely. It's about the process of learning, the joy of expanding your mind, the satisfaction of making connections and uncovering new insights.
And speaking of connecting, he explores how communication, particularly skillful conversation, can be a source of flow for both the speaker and the listener.
Conversation's an interesting one, isn't it? It's this dynamic exchange of ideas and perspectives. It can be incredibly stimulating and enjoyable for everyone involved.
He even talks about how simple word games can help us to develop better control over language.
Right. It's about playing with words, experimenting with different ways of expressing ourselves, and honing our ability to communicate clearly and effectively.
And he also mentions how activities like journaling or exploring our family history can be ways to engage in enjoyable mental flow.
It's about creating narratives, organizing events in time, and finding meaning in the stories of our lives,
So it's not just about the content of those stories.
but about the act of constructing them, of shaping them into something coherent and meaningful.
And it's fascinating how he suggests that even science can be pursued as an enjoyable amateur activity.
He's challenging this idea that science has to be this dry, objective pursuit reserved for academics and professionals.
Right. He encourages us to embrace our natural curiosity and explore the world around us with a sense of wonder and playfulness.
Exactly. It's about reconnecting with that childlike sense of awe and fascination and allowing ourselves to be surprised and delighted by the mysteries of the universe,
And he uses examples of dedicated scientists who were driven not by professional ambition.
but by the sheer joy of discovery, by the intellectual thrill of uncovering new knowledge and understanding.
It's like they're playing a giant puzzle, and the act of solving it, of piecing together the clues. Well, this has been a really powerful conversation.
Yeah, it has.
Thank you for joining us for this examination of Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Stay curious, expand your mind,
Absolutely.
and we'll see you next time.
See you later.
Thank you so much for your like. Please consider subscribing to our channel to keep discovering fascinating aspects of our minds, spirits, and existence.